Economic collapse. Venezuela's crisis begins with a long economic decline that accelerated dramatically in the 2010s. For much of the 20th century, Venezuela was one of Latin America's wealthiest nations, powered by oil discoveries in 1922 and booming exports after World War II. From the 1950s through the 1980s, Venezuela maintained one of the highest standards of living in the region. Oil wealth funded public spending, subsidies, and social programs, but it also masked deeper weaknesses. Governments spent heavily during boom years and borrowed aggressively, assuming oil revenues would always remain high. When global oil prices collapsed in mid-2014 and production declined due to years of underinvestment, the system collapsed under its own weight. Hyperinflation followed in November 2016. The national currency rapidly lost value, prices changed daily, and money stopped functioning as a reliable store of value. By 2018, annual inflation reached 130,060%. Between 2013 and 2025, GDP contracted by approximately 80%, the largest peacetime economic collapse in Latin American history. Wage breakdown. Historically, Venezuela's oil wealth supported relatively high wages compared to the region. Public sector jobs were stable, unions were strong, and the state played a central role in employment. As the economy collapsed, this model broke down. Inflation outpaced wage adjustments, and salaries lost purchasing power almost overnight. By 2010, inflation had already removed any advancement of wage increases. Formal employment shrank, while informal work expanded rapidly. By 2025, the official minimum wage stands at approximately 50 cents to $1 per month, one of the lowest formal incomes on the planet. In practice, many workers rely on government bonuses paid outside the formal wage system, remittances from family members abroad estimated at $4.5 billion annually, or informal dollar-denominated work. Oil dependence. Oil has shaped Venezuela's economy for over a century. By the late 20th century, petroleum accounted for approximately 90% of exports and 60% of government revenue. This created a textbook case of resource dependence. During high-price periods, oil funded infrastructure, education, and social programs. But it also discouraged diversification. Manufacturing weakened. Agriculture declined. The country imported what it could have produced itself. When mismanagement, underinvestment, and political interference reduced oil output from around 3 million barrels per day at the turn of the century to 2.3 million barrels per day by 2014, and international sanctions further limited exports after 2019, Venezuela lost its primary source of foreign currency. With no diversified economy to fall back on, the shock spread everywhere. Market shortages. Shortages became widespread during the 2010s, but their roots stretch further back. Government price controls and currency controls were introduced to protect consumers and stabilize prices, especially during periods of inflation. By 2014, inflation was 69%, the highest in the world, and shelves began to empty. Supplies disappeared not because demand vanished, but because supply became unviable under the controlled price system. As shortages worsened, informal and black markets emerged to fill the gap. Access to food and medicine became uneven, unpredictable, and often dependent on connections rather than income. Food security deteriorated so severely that malnutrition rates increased and millions of Venezuelans began leaving the country. Systemic corruption. While economic mismanagement drove the crisis, corruption accelerated Venezuela's descent and made recovery nearly impossible. According to Transparency International's 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index, Venezuela scored 10 out of 100, the lowest score in the country's history, and among the most corrupt nations globally. A 2014 Gallup poll found that 75% of Venezuelans believed corruption was widespread throughout their government. By 2022, illegal activities generated an estimated $9.40 billion euro, approximately 21% of Venezuela's GDP. Drug trafficking, illegal gold mining, Oil sector fraud and corruption at ports and airports transformed state institutions into instruments of criminal enterprise. The state-owned oil company PDVSA, once a model of technical competence, became a vehicle for laundering money and funneling resources to politically connected individuals. High-ranking military officials formed what U.S. authorities call the Cartel of the Suns, a network using state resources to facilitate drug trafficking. Venezuela became a major transit route for cocaine destined for U.S. and European markets, with corrupt officials providing security and logistics in exchange for bribes. When oil revenues plummeted, these illicit income streams became essential to maintaining the regime's hold on power. Housing distortion. Unlike many countries where housing crises are driven by excessive demand, Venezuela's housing market was shaped by political intervention and economic collapse. Historically, home ownership was encouraged, and the state played a major role in housing provision. Large government housing programs were launched to address shortages, especially in urban areas. By 2011, only 500,000 homes had been constructed during years of promised expansion, far short of need. However, economic instability, hyperinflation, and weak property rights undermined confidence. Financing disappeared. Construction quality declined. Many housing projects were delayed or left incomplete. By 2013, the number of Venezuelans in inadequate housing had grown to 3 million. Instead of becoming a stable market, system breakdown. Infrastructure. Once symbolized Venezuela's oil-funded modernity, large hydroelectric projects, like the Guri Dam highways and public utilities, expanded rapidly in the late 20th century. The most dramatic example came in March 2019, when nationwide power outages, the largest in the country's history, left the entire nation in darkness for days. At least 43 people died, most in hospitals. Power outages, water shortages, and failing transportation systems became routine. Only 30% of Venezuelans have regular access to safe drinking water. Over 7.7 million Venezuelans, approximately 25% of the population, have fled the country since the crisis began. The present crisis. The result is a country rich in resources and history, yet trapped in a system that no longer supports normal economic life, where survival replaced opportunity, and crisis became the baseline. International sanctions imposed after 2019 compounded these challenges, particularly in the oil sector. Yet the core crisis stems from decades of policy choices, fiscal mismanagement during boom years, failure to diversify the economy, price controls that destroyed supply chains. By 2023 to 2024, some economic stabilization occurred through partial dollarization and modest policy reforms, with GDP growth returning. Yet with 82% of the population living in poverty, wages remaining near symbolic levels, corruption deeply embedded, and infrastructure still failing, any recovery remained fragile. The political situation grew increasingly volatile. In July 2024, President Nicolás Maduro claimed victory in presidential elections that were widely condemned as fraudulent. Independent tallies from polling centers showed opposition candidate Edmundo González Urrutia winning with approximately 67% of the vote, but the government refused to release official vote counts. Despite international condemnation, Maduro was inaugurated for a third term on January 10, 2025. In the early morning of January 3, 2026, the United States launched a large-scale military operation named Absolute Resolve targeting Caracas and surrounding areas. Forces captured Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, transporting them to face narco-terrorism and drug trafficking charges in New York. The operation, involving Delta Force Special Operations troops and CIA intelligence support, marked a dramatic escalation in U.S.-Venezuela tensions. Venezuela's government declared a state of emergency and accused the United States of armed aggression. The country now faces profound uncertainty about its political future, economic trajectory, and the possibility of democratic transition after more than a decade of authoritarian rule. This is how Venezuela, once the wealthiest country in Latin America, experienced the largest peacetime economic collapse in modern history, transforming from prosperity to a humanitarian and political crisis within a single generation. What comes next remains uncertain, but the damage inflicted by years of corruption, mismanagement, and institutional decay will take decades to repair, regardless of who leads the country forward.